Hello, my name is Luca and I work here at the engineering department at Guthrie Douglas. Today I'll be taking you through the installation of a TESS 140 where we'll be following through the manual step by step, and you can actually come into our training centre and get this training. So first step in the manual, we'll be checking you've got all the right components. So first you'll be checking that to page 1. So with the system you'll receive a fixing kit which includes all the parts to tension up your guide cable. So your next step will be fixing your left hand end plate, right hand end plate and your return pulleys. I've left these up for the purpose of the video. The most important thing about this is getting the system square. So measuring your diagonals from this corner to this corner and this corner to this corner. And this is a really important step. If you get this within 5 mil, you shouldn't have any issues with fabric performance or bending of the system. It's important that you use at least an M8 type screw to fix these, as there's a lot of tension within the system. In the installation I've taken you through, I was using a top fix return pulley. We have many different options depending on which orientation you want to fix to. We have back fix return pulleys, we have bottom fix return pulleys, top fix, low profile and more low profile pulleys. So after fixing your end plates and your return pulleys and checking your squareness, we then follow on with fitting the cable. So you get your cable and you have one end which won't go through the cable retaining bracket and one end that will. So the end that will go through, poke through the cable retaining bracket. Pull that all the way through, and now we will be cutting it to the right length. Okay. So after your cable is through the cable retaining bracket, your next step is to cut the cable to size. There's a tolerance for this, so the minimum is 7 mil from the bottom of the cable to the top of the return pulley, and the maximum is 17 mil. So you have a 10 mil tolerance here. Okay, so with the tolerance in mind, with the minimum of 7 mil from the top of the return pulley to the bottom of the cable, I'm going to use a small ruler or tape measure, place that on the guide cable, on the return pulley, and then just pencil mark 7 mil from the bottom there, and then I can go ahead and cut my cable. So now your cable is cut, you can insert your first shaft onto the cable, which then I'll be using these 2 little inserts to place around the cable and then inputting the shaft onto there. So after your shaft is on the cable, you now want to tighten this. To do this, you insert a screwdriver into the hole on the shaft and use a 15 mil spanner, and you want to do this up quite tight. Okay, so now you put the shaft through the hole in the return pulley and then do exactly the same thing again, but washer first, and then you can screw your nut on the bottom. So for this next part, you'll need 2 19 mil spanners, where I'll put one on the top of the return pulley and one on the bottom and nip it up tight. Okay, so after you've got your guide cable on one side tight, you now want to mirror this off of the other side, which I've already done. Don't worry too much about the tension, as the guide cables only serve a purpose to stop the hem bar from flapping about. So your next step will be fitting the barrel, where Stuart will be helping me, my colleague in the engineering department. So the barrel wants to come in parallel towards the brackets, going both in at the same time. The cable lifting over the top of the back of the end plates, and then the shaft on the tracking plates will fit onto the screw at the back of the end plate. Using the bolts from the fixing kit and a 10 mil spanner, you'll now fasten your barrel onto the end plates. Okay, so once you have fitted the barrel to the end plates, your next step will be attaching the hem bar onto the guide cables. So your first step will be turning it upside down, and on each end you'll see a screw at both ends of the hem bar. Now what you'll want to use is a posi screwdriver, where you'll put this through the bottom onto the head of the screw, and now you want to loosen this only very slightly and kind of just with feel. I'm going to keep loosening it, and I'm going to be pulling this end cap out towards that way at the same time until it comes a little bit loose. still very slowly on the undoing the screw, just enough so I can slide off the end of the end cap. So now with the end cap, I'm going to put that onto the cable, and I'm going to slide it up and put it back onto the end of the hem bar. And now I can do up this screw again. Okay, so now you just want to repeat that process on the other side. So now your hem bar will be in place on the guide cables. So before feeding your tension cable through in the next step, you want to connect your motor up to the TESS lead, or you can connect it up to the mains, but if you have a Somfy TESS lead, it's best doing it this way. Now this is a manual motor, whereas if you had an RTS motor or radio motor, you would flick it to RTS on the controller, but for our sake, as it's a manual motor, we're just going to keep it on there, and I can now control the blind going up and down on the TESS lead. Okay, so now we are ready to feed the tension cable through around the system. So your first step will be going through the bottom of the hem bar. You feed your cable through, and it should come out on the other side, which it has, and now I can pull that through. So you want to go to the first return pulley, and you want to go from inside to out. So I'm going to feed that through. And then I'm going to repeat this on the other side. So now your cable is through both the return pulleys at the bottom. You want to first start on the motor side. As you can see with the motor side, it doesn't spin the spring cassette, whereas if you go to the other side, you've got a bit of movement there. So it's important you start at the motor side first. So what you want to do is we want to be putting 2 wraps on the barrel, and the wraps always go the opposite way to the fabric is rolled on. So as this, in this sense, the fabric's rolled on this way, so we want to go over the spool that way. So I'll put my 2 wraps on. And now I can go in through the spool, into the hole in the spool where the grip lock is behind, and it will grip the cable. Just enough so it grips it. And now I can pull this side tight whilst just watching the cable spool. Okay. So you don't want to mirror the exact steps I did here for this side. We want to do it slightly different. We're still putting the 2 wraps on the barrel, but at this point we'll be poking the cable all the way through, and that's where you'll cut your cable to the correct length. So I'll put my 2 wraps over the barrel, the same orientation. So I go around once, and I'm going to go around again. And now with this side, as I said, you have a bit of adjustment with moving it front to right, so you want to find the correct hole in the spool to put the cable through. And instead this time of just putting it in enough so it grips, you want to push it all the way through so it comes out the other side of the spool. And I'm going to pull that tight, making sure all the cable is on the spools correctly. And now I can cut that flush with a pair of snips to the end of the spool. Right, so the next step is putting tension in your spring and tensioning your system up. Before we do this, it's a good step just to check that your cable is on all your pulleys. So check here, here, and just check that it's spooling okay. And you might want to move it over to, on this case, to the left, and in this case to the right, just getting the cable to sit nicely. So it's quite important to have your system connected to the power, as we now need to run the system to show the hole in the spool on this side. So I'm going to run that up. And your cable might jump across slightly, but we can sort that out later. So I'm going to run it to that position there, where I now have the entry hole in the spool. So I can use the tension tool supplied in the fitting kit to insert that there. On the spool, there's a hole at the front and there's a hole at the back. So depending on which hole you go through, it might be right to tighten or left. So I'm going to try that now. And you kind of just want to feel for this. So I know that I've gone right there and it's loosening, so I want to go left. Whereas if I was on the other side, it would be right to tighten. And now I'm going to put about 10 to 20 turns on this, just checking that the cable's not going too tight. Okay, so I'd say that's a good amount of tension. We don't have a set amount of tension. You kind of just have to feel for it. One way of knowing if you have put too much tension on is you'll see creasing along the fabric here. So you don't have to worry about coming over to this side and doing the same. When you tension at this side, it tensions the spring inside the barrel, so don't worry about the other side. So now your system is fully installed. The final step will be setting your limit, obviously depending if you have a twist limit motor or a radio motor, just depends on what motor you have. Once you run your system up and down a few times, if you see the fabric tracking over to one side, you'll know that you need to adjust your tracking plates here and here. So I've got them at the top position right now and the tracking is okay, but if your tracking's coming over to one side, you'll adjust the other. If it's tracking over on that side, you'll adjust this side. So that's a full installation of a TESS 140. Thank you for listening. We understand that this is on a small frame and it can be harder on site with access and stuff, but please give us a call in the technical department if you need any support.